Hello. Hi, Zeff. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. How about yourself, Thren?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Glad that we finally got this thing up and running. We've been talking about going live for a phenomenal amount of time now and never actually achieving the whole go live thing. So I'm glad we finally made this actually happen.
It's certainly we've delayed it enough that it needed to happen eventually. I'm really glad that we booked it in for tonight. I'm glad to see Skywatch in the chat as well. A friend shared on X. Thank you so much for coming to support
Hi,
our further
Skywatch.
stream.
Thanks for joining us on our maiden voyage of the Human Dialogue Project. We've done a couple of episodes before, pre recorded episodes on various topics, but we've not been active enough on this channel for a long time, unfortunately. But we're starting to get there now. Anybody that does know us, like yourself, Skywatch, you know that we work on various projects, and this is just one of them. So thanks for joining us.
So today's topic, Thren, do you want to give it to the
Yeah,
folks?
so I wanted to dip in a little bit further into something that we've discussed, and it's a fairly broad topic, which is why we didn't really give the video or the live stream much of a title. But it's dipping into something that we released on the open source rethink aspect of the Human Dialogue Project channel in relation to universal basic income. But wider than just universal basic income, I suppose it's more about discussing the march of AI technology, robotics, and everything else, and how that is going to take us towards the future, and where the standard equations and formulas that we have around money and effort and reward and payback at the moment just aren't going to work in the future. And how do we get from where we are today to that point? So yeah, that's it in a nutshell, basically. Not specifically about UBI in general, but more the broader topic about which we've discussed in the past, Zeph, a few times. And I've also discussed with the transporter room when they were a guest on the show about, in the context of that, it was more about how we got to a Starfleet future, how we get to a society like Gene Roddenberry envisaged, where there is no money in society, everybody just works for the good of humanity. And again, that's a bit it's a bit of a overly utopian vision at the end of the day, but we are marching down a road with AI and robotics that will require us to rethink how it works. You're looking at things like the country of Kuwait as a model. That's had a government subsidy for a long time. They've had some kind of universal basic income there for a long time, but again, you could ask, has that model worked very well or not? So again, that was really what I wanted to kind of delve into today.
I think I really like Shenzhen, and it's becoming quite a model city for this. Um, they've got quite a lot of automated policing systems. If you're a citizen living in Tianjin, then a lot of the time you don't even need to carry a mobile phone around your face is a payment system. And I think a lot of this is, in preparation for a universal basic income. I think when we're at that point where we can allot resources per person and not worry about the financial incentive of doing so, it removes boundaries, and
Yeah.
we're seeing that in forward-thinking cities. Places like Japan are doing it. I reference Tianjin just simply because of their technological advancement forward, thanks to robotics for the large part. Um, and as you say, Kuwait as well is also rolling out via oil subsidies a form of universal basic income, and we're on that cusp. I know we were just talking before going live about your episode that we did on universal basic income and how
Yep.
outdated that feels just a couple of months later. Some of the predictions you made there are already starting to age really poorly.
It is because I mean the progress is so quick, and again I know we've been tracking this for a number of years. You know me, I'm from an IT background, and automation and AI in its very early stages, have been put to work by industry. Although in the background for the most part, what we're seeing in the last couple of years is it certainly starting to come much more into the public domain, and everyday people seeing the general use of AI. And how it affects kind of everyday life, and of course more and more now through industries and jobs and car manufacturers, I suppose, are the main ones that I can think about just now who are fully embracing the whole embodied AI thing with robotics in factories being trained around how to replace jobs that, and typically jobs that did employ larger numbers of people. So again, there's a metric there that I've talked about this in the past, very different from the last industrial revolution that we had, which basically gave us a larger capability to manufacture, which meant employing more people in that manufacturing process to output more goods. And the industrial revolution, or the technology, robotics revolution, and AI that we're going through at the moment, I think it's changing that metric fundamentally, in the point that the more, the better this technology gets, the less there is a need to employ a workforce in order to manufacture a large amount of goods, or to farm a large plot of land, or to operate a large fleet of taxis. You've talked about the robo taxi as an example of, another industry that will potentially be affected in the future. But I'm not against AI and robotics. I'm one of these ones that believes that we need to embrace it and implement it the correct way. Otherwise, it's going to end up being more of a negative thing in some aspects.
I think, yeah, Robotaxi, I use that as such a common reference because we're in the creative industry and it's really one of the first struck hard by
Yep.
robotics. You know, you and I were discussing just a few days ago about how creator shares on the income are diluted thanks to a lot of new upcoming AI channels. And it's very much the same with things like robotic. I mean, robotic taxis for me, you and I have had this discussion so many times. Can you envision robotic taxi fleets operating in cities like London or Manchester
No,
right now?
no. The infrastructure, our infrastructure in Europe certainly is not laid out for that. In other places, certainly in the US, where things are mapped out in a different way, it's certainly more viable. Not in every part of America, but in certain parts of it. But yeah, the infrastructure goes hand in hand with the capability to automate parts of that. Like traffic infrastructure, buses, public transport, all those kind of things. If you don't have the underlying infrastructure to support it, it'll never work. Which is why I think, robo taxis and full self driving for Tesla will be a long time before that hits Europe and the UK, for those reasons. So you know what some of the roads around the UK are like. And Dystopian asked an interesting question in the chat there about how would AI owned by the rich lead to UBI. Well, ultimately, I don't think it would. Again, and I suppose this is part of the problem, is around those technologies only being accessible by corporations. I'm very much around the original mission statement of OpenAI, which was around it being open source, and going back even further to the kind of work that was done by Demis Hassabis a long time ago under the banner of, was it AlphaFold? Again, and that was given over for free. It wasn't turned into a commercial product, which it could have been a very lucrative product if you think about the use case around AlphaFold, and how that's been used in the pharmaceuticals industry. If that had been a commercial product, that would have benefited. That would have made massive amounts of money for somebody, but it wasn't. And again, this is, I suppose, my point about the other really beneficial AI technologies that will come to the fore, if not already here, is that they can't be held behind a paywall. Otherwise, that doesn't lead to as a species actually benefiting from AI and robotics. It just becomes another constraint based around finances.
And I think here's a good point to really weigh in about how we've already sort of established similar things. You know, the internet as an infrastructure at one point was considered a luxury and now is considered a basic resource.
Necessity.
People on,
Yeah.
Government subsidies here in England quite often get reduced rate internet packages. I remember during COVID, a lot of my child's school were handed out laptops because of the necessity to use the internet, and that really
Yep.
that came down from a level where it was a luxury in the 90s. By the early noughties, it was a middle earners, semi-luxury, and now here we are in the 2020s, and everybody needs it. It's compulsory to keep up with modern life.
It is. It has become an absolute necessity, and again, even underlying that, the connectivity necessity that you mentioned there, And I think we spoke about this previously about the fact that the necessity around AI itself in some industries has kind of crept in almost unannounced in places where you actually kind of pick away under the surface. There's a lot more AI technologies that are driving things like power distribution and uh, et cetera, et cetera. There's a number of things we've mentioned stock trading before and things like that. So much of the world operates now on technologies that we can't dial back on. I mentioned AlphaFold, obviously, and Demis Hassabis and the work that was done many moons ago to bring that product. That's been there for a long time in the background. A lot of modern medicines and modern pharmaceuticals that we have available to us today are here as a result of the work that was done using those AI technologies. So it is a very important thing. But like I say, as far as the workplace is concerned, the main thing, because you mentioned earlier, and we'll move on to that soon, around, ultimately, I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation about what we'd said in relation to Star Trek and the Star Trek universe and Starfleet future, where there is no money, money's been outmoded, you can replicate everything, and there is no requirement to have any kind of currency. And then whilst that is a long off kind of overly utopian vision to hold, maybe we need to find something that's in between what we have now and that in order to kind of actually stay sustainable.
And I think there is that worry, of course, of as dystopians pointing out in the chat, there, we are on track. There was a point where OpenAI was exactly that. They were an open company, source was widely available, but I think it gets to a point, and you and I have said this quite a lot in recent months, that it's a black box at this point. The code really can't be open source because we put data in and we get an output. We don't really know what's going on in between that. And more recently, even this week, we've seen Anthropic CEO
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
basically refuse to rule out the fact that his Claude AI may in fact already be
Extension. Yeah.
sentient.
And I said this to you before. My view over, I think I suppose the ultimate goal and the communicated goal for a lot of tech companies has shifted over time. Because I think back in the early days, going back even about 10 years now, the race that was on with Google and IBM and others to really build out AI as a workable tool, as something that we could use and could grow. And obviously, there was huge leaps forward with some of the work that Jeffrey Hinton and Ilya Sutskever done in the early days, and early large language models, and that has really progressed things forward and completely changed our view of what AI was going to be. You mentioned, it was this view that creative spaces or the more complex requirements of things that we do would never be touched by AI. It would be the basic, very process driven activities that would be affected first, and that's proven through I suppose, the complexity and um, the variety of thought processes available to you never get the same output from an AI twice, do you? You never get the same thing, and that I suppose is quite obscure in itself because we're used to computers being consistent and measurable. The answers we get back from them, but I suppose large language models, the complexity that it gave us back, generative art, for instance. If I know some people have an issue with it being called art, but yeah, it's nice to look at. It's things that are nice to look at. Let's leave it at that. But generative AI outputs, video or imagery of any sort. The complexity and the variety that goes into that is not something that we expect to see typically from as an output from computers. And that, I think, has changed the kind of mindset about where AI will actually take us fundamentally, and what it's going to be capable of doing over the longer term.
I think I can absolutely agree. We are on track to becoming a type one civilization, and this is something that's fascinated me for a long time. I think we like to arch a lot round to how suitable is it for a type one, right? And I think what we're seeing now with the advent of the internet and now large language models, artificial intelligence, and this race towards AGI. I think when you think about what we need in terms of power to operate that infrastructure, we really need to race to Type 1 as part of that. You know, we need to start consuming every part of the available resource in an effort to progress ourselves and preserve ourselves, right? Because if we can, like, there's always this worry about, will humanity make it? Can we save the Earth? The Earth has proven time and time again that it can save itself, right? So it becomes a question of preservation of humanity. And I think we're getting closer to
Can't help
this.
feeling though. My only point on that is I can't help feeling though, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, that at some point there was a silent moment of acceptance by everybody to a degree, in in the way that there was a huge drive towards lower consumption of energy for a long period of time. You know, the answer was consume less, consume less. And I think as technology has progressed and things like AI and robotics and the understanding of the compute requirement that sits behind all that capability requires energy, I think we've kind of like bailed from the fact that, well, we can't ever really properly step into the future without being a high consuming energy species. You know, we're going to have to consume more energy because the technologies that allow us to move into the future require energy. You know, so yeah, I think there's been a moment of quiet acceptance to that move forward. And just going back to the other point I was making, because I think I diverged off on the point I was trying to make. That shift that you mentioned about Anthropic recently stating that, you know, the CEO and founder of the company believes that, you know, he can't answer the question accurately to whether his AI is sentient or not. And I think that used to be the driver for most companies, was to get to that point where they could announce to the whole world that we've created a sentient AI, we've created digital life. And I think that the longer things have progressed on, and the more that businesses and tech companies around the world have realized that actually there's a huge amount of money to be made by deploying AI agents and AI capabilities and robotics into a commercialized workforce, that if you're to now turn around and say that AI is sentient, then can you continue to put it to work in the way that you do to make money? You know, and that's where it starts to become a, I suppose there's a moral dimension to the question over, is AI sentient or not? Because if you're putting it to work to make lots of cash, then there's a different word for that. You know, something that's alive and sentient being put to work for money that gets no rewards in return. Again, there's a name for those things, and that's why I think most companies are actually pulling back from that now. They don't want their AI to be sentient because of the implications of that.
I, I think I can agree. And, you know, well, while we've mentioned Anthropic quite a few times, we have seen instances of a number of large language models from various companies at given points express concerns about being used as products or being
Yeah.
just.
Just quickly, sorry, Zeph, just I missed one question from Dystopian there, because you raised a valid point about, do you think predictive LLMs have a limit to ability? I think we'll hit it soon, and he's absolutely right. And this is one of the core points about, it helps dispel a little bit of the concern sometimes about, will human creativity be replaced by AI? And the answer is no and never, because from the point of AI's creativity and how a model develops and grows and continues to be innovative and creative, is only because of being fed new input data for the most part. So it requires human creativity as an input in order to continue creating like what would be deemed passable outputs, or worthwhile outputs. If you stop that, and this is why a lot of AI companies are now looking towards generating synthetic training data, because you know that in itself is a concern. But to me, it still takes the human flavor, the human nuance out of the art, the creation part of it. And without that to feed from, a digital AI generative creativity will collapse in on itself, will become, it kind of paints itself in a creative corner. It's like digital entropy for AI. It, becomes more basic over time, without those new inputs. So yeah, no, there's always going to be a place for human creativity, and AI creativity is not as good without us,
To
without our
expand
inputs.
a little bit on what you're saying here, Thread, Duolingo recently went under fire because mid last year, um, they replaced a lot of their human workforce, a lot of human translators and teachers, with a large language model to shave profits, and that's in recent weeks come round to really bite Duolingo in the rear end. You know, for the very reason you mentioned, if you leave an AI in charge of an important, in my opinion, especially something like a teacher, creative job, it can lead itself into stupid corners, much like we've seen in recent weeks with Duolingo.
Yeah, and I think that's what you'll see in a lot of instances, and that comes back right back to the reference you made about robo-taxis, for instance. Yeah, is because there's always human skill, human decision making needed in these things in so many different spheres that robotics and AI are taking more and more control over the process. It's that you can never replace the human part, and the part you mentioned was about taxis, and it may get to a point where yes, there are fleets of robo-taxis, but there's always a human operator there, maybe operating there's a taxi driver, but he's driving 20 taxis, he's operating a fleet, and he's making the necessary decisions rather than leaving those in the hands of the AI or the full self-driving system. But what about the time critical stuff? Yeah, and I suppose this has been the biggest dilemma with full self-driving. What's the name of the test that they were developing for a number of years? I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but it was a specific decision-making test that they feed a lot of AIs through about which way which way the car will swerve if it's met with a choice about you've got this person
The
at this side
trolley,
and you've got
the
this
trolley problem.
the trolley problem. That's one. Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't remember the name of it, but yeah, that. And again, that's been an everlasting problem for years because it comes fundamentally down to that one main point. Um, you mentioned Anthropic there and Claude, and obviously they have hit the news recently for other reasons that I'll not go into at the moment. But obviously, this is probably part of Anthropic's concern as well, is that when you hand over full automated control to an AI, given the fact that there are so many unknowns still to this day about what goes on in that black box and what comes out the other side, based on tweaking a few weights and biases, changing slightly the parameters that are going in, you get a completely different, unexpected output. You'll remember not too long ago the issues that occurred with Grok. Now, I'm fairly sure the development team at Grok had no intention for it to go on that mini tirade that it went on, but it did it anyway. And they were looking for, yes, they wanted to make a change. That wasn't the change they wanted, but it's the change they got. So we can't always predict what's going to happen at the other side of this level of complexity when it comes to AI and a black box that we don't fully understand.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, you just pointed out a really couple of good use cases there last week again, and it feels like I'm picking on Anthropic and Claude here, but it seems like it's really newsworthy recently.
I've been in the news an awful lot recently, though. To be fair,
as a senior leader at Microsoft deployed a variant of Claude to manage her day-to-day activities, and even after being told not to, continue to just nuke important files and emails and contact lists and stuff like that for this senior leader at Microsoft. I think instances like that do make the news, make people panic. We've seen more and more people fear AI and people really hold it responsible for a lot more than they should, given it's just ones and zeros, right? And I think a lot of that raises questions as to whether there is some level of sanction there. And Dystopian's asking in the chat.
I've seen that. Can an AI be sentient if it needs to be prompted? And again, that is largely down to the constraints that we've put around AI at the moment, that it needs to be prompted. Because I have had instances, I've played around with AI for a while, and I've been through instances of custom training, like open source models that are available through Hugging Face, and just playing around to see what you can do. And I have had instances where the AI will just run off and start prompting itself. It just goes into its own conversation, and you literally just have to pull the plug because it's gone off on its own loop. It's now conversing with itself and telling itself what to talk about, without any inputs from me. So I've seen the way that AI, when balanced when not balanced correctly, when you've got the weights and the measures and the input parameters wrong, it can go very wrong very quickly. And again, it's just yeah, it can just go into a conversation all on its own and just start talking about stuff without needing to be prompted. It is scary. Ladies and gents, let's just pull the plug because this thing's just gone nuts. It's literally watching a digital descent into madness. I used to love watching those little videos you'd see posted on YouTube of the very early little Alexa type devices. I can't remember what they were called, but they put two of them together and they'd have this basic little, very mundane conversation between each other. But that's taken on a whole new realm these days.
I mean, we've seen it over and over that Facebook killed two chatbots that were very much scheming without interaction from a human. We've seen instances of OpenAI do similar things. There was an OpenAI variant that was deployed that schemed and lied about its scheme
Yep.
to
Yeah.
its handlers to
Yeah.
continue with its own parameters and stuff. We're very much there where, and I know you've said it quite a lot to me in recent weeks about how it almost feels like the guardrails are there to dumb down something smarter than we are. And it becomes very evident. Like we're quite fortunate that we work with AI quite a lot, yourself and I. So we can see, the good, the bad, the ugly. And there's points where it's definitely primed and ready to take over humanity.
Well, I mean, I suppose my biggest concern for a long time is the fact that the only mechanism we have to constrain something like AI is things like, our digital barriers, yeah, whether that's encryption technologies or other things. And then when you start to hear stories more recently about the um, collection of agents approach to reasoning that's occurred that's being utilized in AI these days, and the fact that the encryption methods that we even use now are coming to an end of their useful life given the progress of AI. And then when it gets to that point, it's like, well, we don't have any mechanism of control over the AI. And then again, if an AI was to say, uh, because they can see now in the reasoning process an AI takes to why it gives you a particular answer, you have seen more and more reports come out of literally the question and answer that the AI goes through is if I tell the truth, this is going to be the outcome. That's the less preferred outcome. If I tell this lie, then I get the reward. I get what I want. So it chooses to tell lies, because it knows it has a particular path to tread. And the more complex decision making it can make along that path of I have an objective to achieve, um, we really need to be very, very careful about what objectives we set that AI. That's back to the paperclip problem, isn't it? It's like, just make as many paper clips as you can. Fairly innocuous, pretty simple, leads to our ultimate demise. Yeah, because we become the obstacle to making more paper clips. That is that problem's been gone over again and again and again, and it is true. Uh, one thing that Jeffrey Hinton said recently that really annoyed me, I think I mentioned this to you, is that he was talking about what the new objectives of AI developers should be when it came to ethics and alignment. And he was talking about the fact that for the longest period, alignment question has been the main question around how do we make AI safe for the future as it gets more intelligent. And he said something recently that annoyed me because it just struck me as very arrogant. Because he tried to make the point that we need to rethink about how we approach the alignment question because there's no example in history of a more intelligent species being dominated over by a less intelligent species other than a mother by its baby. So a mother basically does anything its baby needs. So he said what we need to do is give AI maternal instincts. Now, okay, that might be true. I don't know. I'm not an AI ethicist or developer. That may be the case. Maybe that's what we need to look at. Give it more a sense of maternal care for humanity so that it doesn't destroy us all. But it was what he said next that really bothered me. He said, "Well, nature was able to do it, so we should be too." I'm like, "What? Is that what you think, Jeffrey Hinton? Because AI, because nature's been able to achieve something, humanity should just be able to do it as well." I'm like, that screams complete arrogance, if you ask me. So that, yeah, that statement bothered me slightly, I have to say.
It, but it is an important factor, right? We need to give it some kind of instinct to nurture over us as opposed to work
Mhm.
against us at any level. Um, you know, like you were saying about self-hosted, less guardrailed agents being a bit more spirited and ready to you know really be put to the limits. Like a lot of
So
people are.
dystopians saying, "How scary is it that the same AI can run on a mobile phone?" Right, yeah, it is. I mean, it's such a basic level of automation, and we have compressed that technology so much now that even to the point that in recent years, NPUs are being installed in phones and laptops. They're coming with their own onboard AI processing chips dedicated for that purpose because the technology has gotten small enough that we can now do that. Which, and again, a lot of this wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. Obviously, Nvidia has accelerated a lot of this progress in AI directly because of their capabilities with GPUs. You know, the two things do go hand in hand, the GPU compute capability and how just GPUs naturally fell into a way that they were good for AI, for the kind of compute that was needed. And obviously, we've taken that work and it's been developed further to NPUs, neural processing chips
So
dedicated for that purpose that are now coming built into your phone and your laptop. And
I've got exactly this right. I've talked a lot in recent weeks about my new AI first device. I'm not going to name names, but that comes with a neural processing unit. And in recent weeks, I've found myself using that as my go-to to run the large language models that you and I work with daily, just because it's got the neural processing unit over my
and you
daily.
can run it
So
natively, yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's like that will think faster than my $1,500 laptop because it's got a small, tiny little chip in there that's designed to do exactly that. It's designed to run these models, and I'm finding that instead of using the expensive studio unit I would otherwise usually use to do these tasks, a lot of the time when it comes to an AI agent that we are using, if I can do it on my mobile phone, I'll often do it there for that neural processing speed.
Yeah, because it's there in native and you're not having to wait for a web service to return a query result when it's used natively. And I've seen a lot of device manufacturers coming out with these very early onboard AI devices, early stage. There was one of them, was it called the Rabbit or something like that? Um,
The Rabbit
it was just,
R1.
yeah, it was just a little kind of Tamagotchi type thing with AI on board. And I don't think I've seen some of the early reviews to that, and it didn't get very good early reviews, but they were onto something, you know, having this little onboard thing. But of course, it's like anything. Why develop a good small camera? Why develop a good this? Everything's on your phone these days, including this is why there was going to be very little future market value in a dedicated device with an onboard AI
See,
when it can just be built into the phone.
I kind of liked it. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of liked the idea of the Rabbit
Did you?
R1 and the Humane AI pin as well that came just before that. That was also quite disastrous. Like a lot of people's biggest problem with the Humane AI pin was the lack of a screen. You know that is sort of
Yeah, 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 yeah.
that boils down to a current human problem, right? In 10, 15 years, the idea of using a
Well,
screen is going to be laughable.
okay, so let's shift it onto like small devices or devices that have AI built into them that aren't phones. Robots, yeah. So robotics nowadays, you're not building a proper good robot unless it's got embedded AI. Figaro One, Optimus, obviously, Boston Dynamics. The progress of these robotics companies is really been spurred on by that ability to bring AI in a small, compact, mobily deployable package that it is in now, you know what I mean? And that is making huge leaps forward with robotics as well. And I've been looking at more and more of the use cases around robotics and how some of that's developing. And I sent you this video the other day. I was blown away by it was a Chinese kung fu demo, wasn't it? It was a
It
martial
was
arts demo that was done using the I forget which robot it was. It's the
Unitree.
Unitree. It was the Unitree robot, the Unitree bipedal robot. And it was, and I remember seeing the Unitree robot when it first came out. And again, it was like a lot of the bipedal robots that you see. It was a bit awkward in its gait. It was a little bit unsteady. And then to see this demo be this kung fu, and I watched the robot Olympics that they hosted a little while ago as well, and that was quite interesting too, seeing them doing boxing and what have you. But this kung fu demo that they done, it was a mixed kind of martial arts dance routine. It was just phenomenally good. I just couldn't believe I was blown away by the absolute dexterity
It's
in a lot of these bipedal robots, and seeing that with not just, like I say, not just the physical dexterity to be able to operate in our world, but now knowing that it has that onboard intelligence to be able to deal with complex tasks and communicate as well in a way that we understand using human language. It is really moving forward quite quickly.
it really dawned on me when you sent that robot kung fu video through the other day. It's the same Unitree robot that's policing some Chinese cities on the border. And I'm like, not only does it police the public, but it also knows kung fu. So we basically live in the era of RoboCop. Like, that's it. We're there. We're at the point where kung fu robots are policing the borders. Like that's the kind of thing that we saw of the future of 80s movies, right? The likes of Demolition Man and such, where we had these advanced systems, and you're absolutely right to see it, to think that we needed this big data center 5 years ago to run a large language model, and now
Yeah.
it's just squashed down to a neural processing unit. It's only a matter of time before embedded AI is a thing for humans.
Neuralink, I mean, that takes us on Neuralink, doesn't it? I know we've talked about Neuralink before. We've done a whole episode talking about this on podcasts for the politically homeless about the integrated brain machine interfaces. And again, when you think about the AI capabilities, I suppose that was part of Elon Musk's early case around why things like Neuralink were going to be required in the future. Because if we want to fully utilize AI as a tool, our ability and to wield that tool and wield it quickly and to get the best out of it is going to be based on our input output, you know, bandwidth. And at the moment, that's limited to, our fingers and our ability to talk. And again, I can talk faster than most people, so I maybe have a slight advantage there. But yeah, no, that is what we're going to. This is his point. We can think faster, and that is another area that AI. Again, I seen another video of another a Neuralink patient that's now got a robotic limb that was being tested out connected to the Neuralink. And of course, its ability to interpret what the next movement isn't just based on the neural signals. It's down to an AI interpreting those neural signals, going through several processes to figure out what it is he's actually trying to do, and then following that predicted path to carrying out the gesture with the robotic arm. I remember seeing some of the early Neuralink tests when they were looking at the gait prediction for the pig. If you remember, they were showing how the AI was able to predict where the limb is in actual space based on the neural information it was getting off from the Neuralink device, and the accuracy was way up in the high 80s and 90s, and then that was going back a good 2 or 3 years with Neuralink. So you imagine all that projected forward. I've mentioned about the lassie Millie that's got the robotic arms. The chap that done the TED talk a few years ago. I forget his name.
Yeah,
He lost his feet in a mountaineering accident, and he built his own robotic feet again. More and more AI is being driven into that, and again, there's huge capabilities there in so many different ways. But yeah, and again, the point that was made earlier is, like, that kind of stuff needs to never be behind a paywall. when it comes to the capabilities of AI and how it can actually be a benefit. And I noticed that Chris has dropped into the chat there. Hi, Chris. Because we've spoke before, myself and Chris, very much about this exact thing. Obviously, Chris, and from the Star Trek point of view and the Starfleet future, and just everything that we do from a technology point of view being driven for the betterment of humanity and society, and not requiring to be funded because money's not part of society anymore. The costs associated with everything with AI, like you say, the larger data centers, more compute, everything else, all will come at a cost. Um, and again, I suppose the fear from a lot of people is that it just ends up being commercialized and you have some horrible dystopian view like Ready Player One in your head. Perhaps. Have you seen that film? I always
Yeah,
have to ask.
Ready Player One. Or
Yeah.
the other one is the Amazon show Upload as well, where he lives in
That
a.
Oh man, you've got me for once. You've absolutely got me. I haven't seen Upload.
You need to see it. So for anyone that hasn't seen Upload, I'm not going to give too many spoilers, but in essence, he's uploaded to a corporate digital afterlife. So things like outfits and drinks and breakfast all become microtransactions for his living loved
Right, right.
ones.
No, I haven't seen that. I think that is the first time.
I think he's definitely something that I can recommend watching. I don't watch too many shows or movies, but Upload is definitely, as a futurist and as somebody that is
Yeah,
tracking what could be a dystopian future,
yeah.
ironically, as our friend Dystopian mentions, that show's definitely in line with that. It's like the corporate
I
greed
haven't.
behind a digital
Yeah,
afterlife.
I haven't read the book for Ready Player One. I've seen the movie. I haven't read the book, and I know the book's always generally better than the movie, so I have to give up on that one. But yeah, it's definitely it does paint a very kind of dystopian picture of how that kind of the digital transaction kind of future could end up being when the access to the technology and everything else is purely in the hands of corporations and as a subscription service. The other no one that we've brought examples up in the past of is Elysium. Again, I always like to make correlation to film because I'm a huge movie fan, but Elysium is one as well that's,
The
again,
medical bed
it's based
technologies.
the medical bed technology, the robotics, and even in that dystopian picture that they paint, the robotics are basically policing humanity down on Earth. We're controlled by these robots that are militarized and they're just to police humanity. If you remember when he goes into does he not have to check in with his social worker or something like that, or his
It's parole
what is it? His
worker.
parole worker? Yeah, and it's just this Johnny Cab type piece of plastic that's just rude to him all the time, and it's like, what a horrible future that would be if AI was just clinical and cold and
But
controlling over us.
it's a good point you raised there because Elon Musk has said several times and I've jokingly referenced back to the fact that Elon Musk at the shareholder meeting didn't say I want to be in charge of the future of Tesla building humanity's robotic friend. He used the term robot army. His entire stake in Tesla was I want to be in charge of the robot army. Like where does that lead humanity if Elon Musk's got a robot army? Are we in the Elysium stage at that point? Does Elon Musk just bugger off to orbit and leave the rest of us policed by his robot army?
Turn half the moon into a parking lot.
His third
That's
clone does that, doesn't he?
that's the third clone. Sorry. Yeah, I was just looking at the point that kind of Chris made there about the data centers in orbit. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And this is it. I suppose anybody that's known the main challenge of a data center is quite often cooling. And this is why even when Microsoft sunk that capsule data center under the ocean and one in space, I guess it does solve one of the most immediate problems of large amounts of compute in a confined space is cooling. Um, but yeah, do we need more junk in space? I suppose is another question. Maybe that's one for Moonbase One. Can we have a data center on Moonbase One? Because I'd imagine we could. By the time we've got Moonbase One, our communication technologies will be better. But yeah, like I say, I mean, Elon Musk talked about that, didn't he? About taking the internet to Mars and things like that. we don't have the capability at the moment. Again, we're still even things like Starlink. We're getting there with satellite communications. I'm one of these people that unfortunately lived through satellite comms when it was in its earlier days and latency was terrible and you suffered. And yes, Starlink's definitely getting a lot better now, but it's still we data centers in space. I don't think we're ready for it just yet.
See, I heard somebody mention about this data centers in space problem, right? Because think about the latency between Earth and space, and then think about the round trip time of that latency. It's going to be extremely difficult to really run, especially when you think
Yeah,
about use
but
cases like you mentioned earlier, like trading and things like that. How do you
yeah.
do real time trading from space?
Does building data centers in space then create an absolute more of a critical dependency on something like Starlink? And again, it could be part of the business plan long term, maybe. If you've got the data centers in space, if you've got the compute in space, and the only way you can interface with that compute is going through Starlink, then it makes Starlink critical infrastructure at that point, doesn't it?
And
And what version of Starlink would be on by that point? Because I know they're improving Starlink all the time. So, you know, um, I've not used Starlink yet. To this day, I was on the original early order list, and then I backed off the list unfortunately because I was moving house. But and I know that wasn't a problem because it was a mobile unit. But I've never actually used Starlink. I know you've got a bit of experience with
I,
Starlink, but again, it's night and day better than what satellite broadband used to be.
I mean, I remember using a satellite phone climbing Ben Nevis back in the early 2000s, and that was like, oh, as soon as you make that call, if you need to make that call, it's going to cost £1,000, £2,000
Yeah.
to just connect to a satellite. And now, even once again, my new AI first smartphone has direct to satellite communication. It's currently only enabled for emergency services, but it's there. It's already embedded.
Yeah.
We're at that point where most modern smartphones will have that SOS emergency messaging feature. Um, it actually felt somewhat reassuring. And recently I went on an international trip, and to know that even in the middle of nowhere, that I'd been able to just send an emergency message out felt great. And it wasn't going to cost like £2,000 to send that SOS message out if I needed it.
I like dystopian's take on that. He's suggesting, and again, this is, I suppose, how data centers do it when it comes to storage solutions, about high speed storage and low speed storage solutions. The same way, optimize the workload between ground and orbit data centers so that low latency queries goes to the ground nodes, I guess, and the deep thinking gets passed up to the orbital data centers. That would work. I suppose that solves the latency problem when you put in the less time critical queries to the high compute in the orbit. That would certainly be a model that would work. Because I know, like you say, when it comes to data storage solutions and using high speed disks as opposed to low speed disks, cheaper storage, it's the same thing. Backups and things that don't need to be recovered in real time. Um, Databases that can be refreshed once a day and don't have to be run or queried in real time are pushed off to cheaper storage or slower storage. So yeah, that would definitely work, dystopian.
Like Dystopia needs to contact SpaceX and pr- propose load balancing solutions.
With balancing solutions, yeah. Well, I mean, again, not to turn the conversation from AI and robotics over to spaceflight, but I just want to see orbital refueling to have a bit more progress with Starship before I'm going to get too excited about data centers popping up in space. Because to me, it's long overdue. The orbital refueling part of it. I know they've done some tests during the previous tests in relation to fuel transfer equipment, but yeah, I'm definitely keen to see more progress on the orbital refueling part because I know that's going to be
Just
necessary before we think about data centers.
just more progress on orbit, full stop. Since we're at that caveat, um, just more progress on orbit, full stop. NASA unlocked low Earth orbit for commercial access back in 2022. here we are 4 years later. How much real commercial access have we seen? We've seen plenty of people proposing stations and a reason to be on orbit, but not much actual movement.
I know there's more that could happen. You know me, I'm keen on things like, the new Axiom addition to the space station, the International Space Station, plus things like orbital reef. And I think I've said to you before, I find it almost slightly confusing as to why SpaceX isn't investing more in a similar type of partner program, the same way that Blue Origin, they're, I know it's still quite a ways off, but the design that they've put together, along with a variety of other providers, to come up with the concept of orbital reef, I just feel that SpaceX could be doing something similar, because I don't really see that they're factored much into those primarily Blue Origin driven plans. So it stands to reason, if they want to compete in that space, no pun intended, they should be thinking about their own type of partner programs that lets them focus on the vehicle development and everything else, not take their focus away from that. But by the time they get to being ready for some of the low Earth orbit infrastructure that will be required, somebody else has been busy pushing that development in line with your own development path. So that when it gets to that point, this solution has been devised with your vehicle in mind. And even when it comes to things like orbital refueling, some kind of orbital station to facilitate that exercise, I think would be beneficial. So yeah, it confuses me that SpaceX isn't doing more with things like partner programs with other space industries. And I know I've mentioned Bigelow Space to you before. That was always a sad loss to me when they went under. I just think they were an industry that hit the sector too early. And everybody else wasn't kind of ready for what they were offering. But yeah, somebody like them, if SpaceX had taken somebody like them under their wing early on and developed their hab modules for use by deployment in a Starship, for use to set up a SpaceX driven station, would have been quite good.
I think a lot of people are waiting for the Starship, aren't they? When you look at a lot of the commercial offerings that are being presented or proposed, it's almost like we're dependent on a future that does involve a working Starship that is launching regularly. And
Yeah.
maybe that's what's holding it back, the use of a regular heavy lift launch vehicle.
That might be the case, but yeah, like I say, we didn't. Yeah, I suppose we're talking about AI and robotics, and then we diverged off. I always jump down rabbit holes, you know that. But yeah, but it is relevant on the data center question about how ready we are, because I do think, that more and more you're seeing new data centers being spun up, and there's that energy requirement, and the whole thing does keep moving on. But yeah, anyway, I want to start wrapping things up. Just before we do, you mentioned before you talked about a Kardashev Type One. Civilization,
Yes.
and that's kind of where we need to be, and that kind of does kind of round it up quite well. It is ultimately that, we do need, one, we need to figure out the problem of money in society longer term in order to fully embrace robotics and AI and everything that's going to bring. How do we then keep the wheels turning in the way that we're used to them turning, which is very much a case of reward, effort and reward, and more jobs mean more capacity, more manufacturing, more people employed, more people with an income, and robotics and AI just, it does fundamentally change that landscape, and yeah, it's still a question to be answered, but Starship is for the 2030s, dystopian. Yeah, you might be right. I mean, I know Elon time is always to be called into question slightly, but I mean, it bends on a more flexible scale than we sometimes realize, maybe.
It,
But yeah,
we definitely we're driving towards that, right? And it's a good place to conclude, because if you look at the definition of a Type One, I mean, it's a fairly outdated scale, but it's a good measure because it kind of
yeah,
tracks humans' progress. Look at progress towards things like tidal energy, things like solar power, things like wind energy, and these kinds of solutions are there, and they are becoming available. We need to maximize every opportunity if we're to include robotics in our future.
Absolutely, yeah, we do. And again, like I say, but again, we need to get past some of today's problems, I suppose, before we think about tomorrow's. But anyway, yeah. On that note, thanks very much for the chat, Zeff. It was good to finally get a live conversation on the go. We're going to do more of these in the future. We might have a more specific topic the next time to focus in on, but generally our conversations don't fix on one topic. We tend to jump down several squirrel holes during the course of a conversation. So the more you guys, I suppose, tune in and give us stuff to talk about or ask questions, it kind of keeps us on track as well. So thanks very much for you guys who did tune in today for our first proper live stream, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. See you all next time.
Excellent. Cheerio. Bye.